you know if you got it, go and get to win and not conquer. I had to go out and get it without a sponsor. Kept it real, never crooked, yeah, that's honor. Now I can go out and get it how I want to. Hashtag bless, I choose.
What is up, Rumble, YouTube, and Twitter? Welcome back to the Ryan Matta Show. Today is Wednesday, May 15th. It's 9:03 p.m., and we have a special guest for you guys today. Daniel White is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about all things Bitcoin, fixing the money, fixing the world. He has an amazing book that he's actually writing, and he's doing so in real time. It's actually, I'm going to pull it up right here. I had it here in the messages, and then I clicked away from it. It's called The Great Realignment: Money, Power, Greed, and Bitcoin. And what's really neat is it's free. It's over here on his Medium, and he's writing it in real time. I've never seen anybody do that. So he's like kind of like doing like a little experiment. So as he's writing the book, he's sharing it over here on Medium, and you can read along with him as he's writing this novel. So I won't overtalk it. Daniel, welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be here.
Honored to have you on the show, man. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where'd you grow up at?
Well, I grew up originally in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I spent most of my adult life in Los Angeles. I worked in the film industry down there for probably 15, 20 years, something like that. But since then, I kind of became an overeducated nerd and sort of bounced around the world a little bit. I spent a little time down in Auckland, New Zealand. I lived in London, England for a little while. And now I've sort of parked myself in Oregon, USA. So, yeah.
New Mexico. And then you got into the film industry. Do a lot of people from New Mexico get into the film industry?
Lately, yeah. Now, I mean, there's a pretty big industry going on out there, but I sort of stumbled into it really. Like I moved to LA and I was working in a clothing store and I was sort of dreaming of being like a rock star or something. I mean, I was like totally delusional. Just couldn't sing, couldn't play
Old
guitar
American
for
dream.
shit. And just, yeah, but thought for sure I was going to make it, make it big someday. And yeah, but I stumbled into a job at this place that was doing film and television post-production and just sort of didn't quit was all it really boiled down to. But it was just an insane time in the industry at that point because it was back in the 90s and it was just cash from chaos. And I mean, it was
that like during the days of like the Pepsi commercials and like the Coca-Cola wars and stuff like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, we like the place I work for, we were one of the editing houses for Frasier and we did Seinfeld and all kinds of stuff. So it was, but these guys, it was like in that weird transition between like film editing and nonlinear like computer editing. So like when our guys came along, we put out a business, all the old guys that used to cut film on film. And then like the computer guys came and put us out of business about 10 years later. But,
yeah.
But in between, it was like those guys just made an absolute mint. I mean, it was insane. So yeah, it was a pretty interesting experience, but it kind of gave me a neat foundation for sort of wandering into advanced education. I guess you could call me like a late bloomer or something like that, right? So, yeah.
So where did you go after that? What was after? You said you went over to, where's it, New Zealand?
Yeah, well, when I was in Los Angeles, like once the film industry, at least the portion of it that I was in, sort of imploded, I kind of found myself like being this grossly overpaid sort of lunatic. I'm like super in debt and just all kinds of wacky ideas about how the world works and stuff like that. And it was in the weirdest of places. It was like couples therapy. This lady was like, you don't need couples therapy. You just need to grow up. Like you need to go get an education. You need to go do something with yourself. And so I kind of looked around and I ended up signing up for law school of all things, and because I was looking at like biology and I was just kind of, I don't know. I don't give a shit about any of this stuff. But law school was like, oh, okay, I could kind of get on board with this. And I didn't know anything about it. I just sort of stumbled into it. Like last minute, I went down and took the LSATs, and like I didn't study. I just blundered through the whole thing. And my first school I went to, I got through the first year and was just like, I have no idea what's going on. Then went to another one, but finally ended up getting my JD. And from there, I kind of went to like a ding dong law school. Like there's like top tier, like Yale, Harvard, Stanford kind of thing. And then there's like second tier and then third tier trash. And my school was like sort of below all that, So I went and got a master of laws at Thomas Jefferson School of Law in San Diego. And while I was there, I found that I had a pretty good eye for legal research, legal publishing, things like that. So I published a bunch of articles while I was there on like securities law, bankruptcy law, stuff like that. I got a big like 4-part series in the Banking Law Journal about money laundering, the anti-money laundering complex in the modern era, I think is what it was called. And from there, I took that research, and then I was going to go do a thing in political economy down in New Zealand. Got accepted to the London School of Economics over in London, and then switched my degree while I was there for another master's. That was my second master's I was going for at that point, and I switched it to criminology of all things. I figured it kind of tied in with the legal work earlier, and the courses I wanted to take at the LSE weren't available when I showed up. So I just sort of went, I don't want to sit here and study about, international finance stuff. I went and picked criminology. And since then I kind of came back to the States and started working in government work. And and so now I'm kind of an executive in county government, and I'm part of the problem, I think. So yeah.
Holy
But
shit. We got
kind
a
of
lot to unpack here, my friend. I
oh
didn't
yeah.
Man, I love when the interviews get this interesting right off the bat. How sweet is this going to be? So tell us a little bit about are you like a just natural born genius, or is this something that you evolved into? It seemed like you sounded like you're underselling yourself there, and all of a sudden we go into two masters and like
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's very kind. If you had met me in high school and said this guy's going to have two masters someday, you would have been like, no, like zero chance.
just no, absolutely no.
Yeah, that's just not going to happen. This guy's a moron. But I think it was, I had a lot of growing up to do, and the couple therapists was right. Like I look back on it, I was kind of going, yeah, she really nailed it. Like I was
Eyes
just,
are watering.
well, just super emotionally immature and just kind of a wreck, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm very fortunate, very blessed that it was like later in life when I actually got to start unpacking some stuff that I really needed to go through and grow up a little bit and become like an actual adult human being.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of timed really well with like the legal, like law school, and and the sort of fascinating thing about studying law that I didn't really realize before I did it was it's like history. It really is a historical narrative that you're studying when you're in law school.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike most history, there's that saying like history is written by the winners, right? Well,
Yeah,
with
sure
legal
is.
history, it's written by the judges, and those guys are arbiters of dispute and human conflict. And the common law in the United States that traces back to England, which traces all the way back to the Magna Carta, is a history of people, really, really thoughtful people, trying to figure out how to navigate conflict and trying to be in the middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
And so you see some really fascinating insights just in how our systems develop and things like that. And that turned out to be the really fascinating thing for me, is like I just really enjoyed kind of getting into that sort of history. And if you read all my research papers and stuff, I always start with a historical narrative because I like seeing where things come from and then how we ended up, why we're here and things like that. So that's kind of so no, not necessarily a super genius, just someone who's motivated by interest, more like autism, I think, than anything else.
Do you have photographic memory?
Oh God, no. Yeah. I gotta work really, really hard to kind of get through. Like when I was at the LSE, it's super competitive school. I didn't really think they'd let me in. I'm pretty sure they only let me in because they just needed an old person for their demographics, and I kind of fit. But I worked my ass off while I was there, and I'd watch some of my classmates, and they're all like 21, 22, 23, something like that. They were going out partying, and they were super competitive with me, and I was like, nose to the grindstone, reading books every night.
Mm-hmm.
And I did really well. I graduated top of my class out of the school, but it was well earned, and it certainly wasn't something I just stumbled into. Like I feel like I got to put a lot of effort into just barely becoming coherent, So.
So tell me, so where did all this knowledge first land you a job? What was the first thing you did after you got these degrees?
What's crazy about it is the first thing I did, because I got my degree in criminology, criminal justice policy, technically, I decided I was going to go into public service. And one of the big things about like any sort of public service you do around the criminal justice field, if you try and come in without like the practical on the boots ground knowledge kind of thing of how that system works, people just look at you like you're an asshole, and you kind of are an asshole. You don't know the reality of like what it's like to work as a patrolman or as a correctional officer or something like that. So I went all the way down and got myself a job as a correctional officer in a prison here in Oregon, and started there. So I'm like this super overeducated sort of weirdo walking around as a CO. super illuminating. I mean, it really, really paints a different picture of like what the system is like. And, you
Oh
know, when
yeah.
you see it from that angle, it's very different than sitting in the executive suite and making decisions about stuff. So that's where I started. And I kind of, I mean, I don't recommend that job to anybody.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, it's pretty tough. But it really put a pretty solid frame on like how the criminal justice system works, things like that. So it was, yeah, eye opening for sure. Yeah.
And then where'd you go from? How long did you do that for?
Did that 3.5, almost 4 years, something like that. And then I took this executive position here. It's a regional jail that I work at now. And one of the three, you know, part of the executive team that runs the whole sort of thing. So, um, you know, you do what you can, but systemically speaking, like you can kind of see the rot all the way to the bottom of that. And it's all fiat rot. And you start realizing like that fiat rot kind of goes everywhere. You know, I'm very fortunate that guy Satoshi's Militia, he actually is a friend of mine that is local to me here, like we're in real life friends kind of thing. And so I have like a Bitcoin outlet to sort of talk about this stuff, but you know the
Yeah.
rest of the folks, I'm like, you got to be buying Bitcoin, and they're just whatever. This guy, you know, get
Yeah.
out of here. Yeah. So that yeah, I mean, you just start to see like how all these little pieces have gotten broken, and then how broken they will continue to be, and then there's this sort of beautiful light at the end of that tunnel that you're going to go, oh yeah, there's Bitcoin, and there's a way out of this mess, and it doesn't have to be catastrophic collapse of society. It can be something where we can slowly unwind this mess and get it back to something that looks like sanity, you know.
Talk to me a little bit about the structure of of the prison system. What are you seeing as far as are you allowed to talk about it? That's what I should ask before we
Oh
get
yeah,
on
yeah.
the
No,
show.
I mean, there's no secrets in the, you know, they're very opaque. Like nobody knows kind of what goes on in them, so they get a lot of weird reputations and things like that. Ultimately, in that system, it's a communication business, right? I mean, you need to learn how to talk to people because you know, like you're one guy and there's 100 inmates around you, and that's it. Like you know, I mean, people can come and help you if something's going wrong, but the idea is that you don't want things to go wrong to begin with. And the thing that people really mistake about prison punishment, all that sort of stuff, is they kind of envision like they go, hey, you know, that guy's in prison, he deserves it. But when they think of someone in prison, they got like the guy with the neck tattoos and he's got a 13 on his face, and you know he looks like a thug, and they go, yeah, that guy should, you know, you do the crime, you do the time. What they don't see and what you find out real quick in prison is that you go, oh yeah, it's about 50, 60, maybe 70% of the people there are people just like you, just like me. There's a woman down there, she was in for manslaughter two. So she was a middle class lady, got drunk, you know, lost control of her car on an icy road. Husband went through the windshield, died. Other lady got hurt or maybe died too. And she went from, you know, just middle class lady to getting processed in. And if you watch the intake process, you just go, oh, you never, ever want to go through that. And the trouble for folks like that is they come in and they still have those same ideas, those punitive ideas, like, oh, if you did the crime, you did the time, you should do the time, and you know you're getting what you deserve, and all that kind of stuff. And when they show up, it's this incredibly dehumanizing experience. You're just lined up with a bunch of other people, and some of them really are thugs, you know.
Hmm.
And for someone like that, like the first time they have to go, you know, because if you try and introduce yourself, though, you know, there's people that'll help you out when you're in prison, and they'll kind of tell you what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and they can tell that you're a fish and you have no idea what you're doing. And so as people get processed in, you know, they like people like that want to tell their story. You know, they go, oh, it was an accident, and I didn't really understand. And people, you know, and they go, shut up, just shut up. Like, just don't even bother. The only way someone asks you why you're here, you just tell them your last name, you tell them what your charges are, and that's it. And just walk off, you know. And uh, she said, you know, the first time that it ever really dawned on me is when, you know, she checked into to the prison and said, yeah, well, my name's Smith and I'm here for man two. And she said, that's the first time it ever occurred to me that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't just some mistake. This wasn't, you know, a terrible thing. This was, I killed somebody and I'm in here for manslaughter, you know. And she did 10 years or something like that. So when you start reflecting on that kind of stuff, and then you see how like the prosecutorial process works, and it's really pretty tragic how we deal with that kind of stuff here in this country. And so, yeah, that's I guess the best I can sort of sum up that structure is like people really just don't understand what it means, you know, to put somebody in prison, and how much drain and cost that is on society and stuff like that. So.
Man, I don't think I've ever heard anybody describe it like that. It's pretty hard. How do you separate that when you come home at night after you're doing that all day?
I didn't. I mean, that whole job made me pretty ill. Like it, it takes a lot out of you. The Oregon DOC did a great big health study back in 2016, with the Oregon Health and Sciences University, and they just wanted to see how correctional officers sort of fare compared to the general population. What they found was average life expectancy of a correctional officer in the state of Oregon was 59, whereas the general population is 77. I mean,
Yeah,
that's how much that takes off your life, And you're in prison, you're in terrible environment. The stress is high. You work insane hours. It's a really, really unhealthy place to be for everybody, like not just the people that work there, but the people who live there, everybody. So yeah, it's not anywhere you'd want to get to, I don't think. Yeah.
yeah, man. And then I look at jails like like the DC jail where they got these innocent J6ers, and I'm interviewing some of
Oh
their
God.
family members, and they're completely innocent, and not just my opinion. I mean, there's one guy, Ron, who was a sheriff too. He's the worst of them all. He was a
Yeah.
sheriff off duty that day, went there with his sheriff's vest on to help the cops. He actually saved two cops' life, but he was at the wrong place. And even though he saved two cops' lives, and the cops like puts his arm around him, like it's all on camera, the 7-minute ordeal, and
Yeah.
because they had a hard on for these guys, he's sitting in a cell right now facing.
Yeah.
He was facing 20 something years. He ended up getting like 6 or something like that, but he's still it's a
Jesus. Yeah.
your entire
Well, I
life
mean
changes,
that's yeah. I mean, you can get turned upside down, and the way that the criminal justice system is working now, and especially around stuff like that, like it's just it's deeply, deeply corrupt, and the incentive system is completely broken. And there's, I mean, I've met people. Like I met a guy who was legit like homeless dude and just sort of running around cruising and whatever. And so, what are you in here for? And he goes, I got 5 years for ID theft, identity theft. And you go, oh, how'd that happen? He goes, well, I found a credit card. No, did he steal a card? I don't know. But he went into a local convenience store and he bought himself some Cheetos and a Slurpee or something like that. 30 years ago, they go, oh, it's petty theft. They might whack him around a little bit and then kick him out of the station. Today, it's identity theft because some prosecutor somewhere can go, oh, yeah, well, that's another felony notch on my belt, and they can get reelected next time. And so they threaten the guy with, we're going to give you 20 years for all these charges because they can just stack these charges on top. And or you can plea out and you get 5. And he goes, well, I mean, if you have half a brain in your head, you plea out and take 5, right? And but if you think about the cost on society, that's 45 grand a year bare minimum. That's provided the guy doesn't get sick, he doesn't have cancer, he doesn't come down with, like, you got to pay for hepatitis C treatments or any, I mean, that cost can just magnify exponentially fast. It's 45 grand a year. So this guy stole $5 worth of stuff on a credit card that the bank doesn't give a shit, and they're just going to write it off anyway. And the taxpayers are on the hook for a couple $100,000. And you're going to go, yeah, that was worth it. Like, what are we doing here? And you take those people that are, depending on your perspective on the whole J6 thing, like either these people are protesting, there's people that are kicking down the doors and raising hell. Either way, you kind of look at like how they're going about those prosecutions and what people are getting rung up for, and you just kind of go, man, this is not the way this system is intended to be operating. And meanwhile, we got people running amok, and they're burning cities down for, and those guys are just, what they get? Nothing. I mean, they wouldn't even get, yeah, well, they didn't even get hassled.
They got
And
all that
so,
bonded out by the vice president.
yeah,
That's
I mean,
legit.
it's just a joke, the whole. But again, it's a sort of symptom of a larger
Yeah,
system that
it's
we
what we're getting
operate
to.
in. Yeah, and it's
How well?
yeah, and that's go
How are
ahead.
these prisons? You had said like that you can see the fiat system rot in them, and like how are like these are prisons are privately owned, if I'm understanding that correctly. Like these aren't something that the government owns.
No, these are state run here. One of the nice things about the state of Oregon is they don't run any private prisons here, so that's good. But there are states, there's corporations that run prisons, and you kind of go, well, what's the economic incentive there? It's like, well, we need to lock more people up and cut costs. And if you talk to any of the, inmates that are down in California where they have a bunch of private prisons, they go, those things are just off the chain. I mean, the workers there get paid less than McDonald's. They get compromised all the time. The prisons are all run by the inmates anyway. I mean, there's no, and especially in places like California and Texas and whatnot, there's very little social control wielded by the people that run the facilities. They open and close the doors, but it's the rest of it's managed by the people that live there. And that's sort of the fascinating thing about like the way these power structures develop in the United States or in England or in Afghanistan or in prisons. It's a lot of it is rooted around, like, if you look and see how those power structures all develop, they all develop from the same place. Like, people are confronted with chaos, and then strongmen sort of rise up and try and put an end to the chaos, despite the fact that they may have been participating in the chaos leading up to it. And so when you start talking about those power structures, power dynamics, like, it makes sense why prisons run the way they do, because it's the same way our country runs, sort of, and it's based on the same sort of principles and ideologies and honor codes and honor systems and all that kind of stuff. It's just, if you look at the American judicial system, that's rooted in 1,000 years of development. If you look at what's going on in California prisons, that's 20 years of development, right? And that's sort of the distinguishing line. But it's the same symptom of the same rot of the same philosophies that underpin, everything in all of our structures, all the way through the way power structures developed in medieval England, all the way to the way the power structures are developing like Afghanistan. And if you want some really sharp parallels, like, go take a look at the way Afghanistan is governed right now. I mean, there's warlords that all banded together under like this really strict code of religious intolerance. And they have this strict behavioral code that's regulated by honor systems and things like that, and harsh punishments for violations of those codes. Like, you stole something, we're cutting your hands off. You did adultery, we're cutting your head off. You go back to England in 800 AD or whatever, and you go, what did it look like? Oh, well, there's a bunch of warlords all got together. They got in bed with the church, and just in response to the widespread chaos, they all got together and enacted this really strict system of religious intolerance and, strict adherence to religious codes. And if you did anything wrong, like you stole something, well, we're just going to hang you. Or if you kidnap somebody, we're just going to hang you. I mean, so
I think, should we go back to that?
Well,
Public
you could,
seems like that'd fix a lot around here.
Maybe you'd think, and yet it's, I know, but the broad point being is, like, if you give the Afghans enough time, they're probably going to come up with something that looks like what we have now. But trying to impose that now on top of them isn't going to work, right? And that's sort of a lot of where this book and what I'm talking about, like, I'm writing right now the part on power and where power comes from and why people wield power and how they get power and all that kind of stuff. And the first section of the book was about money and the sort of history of money and all that together. It's like, I'm trying to get people to sort of understand, like, the fundamental truths that are underlying where a lot of this stuff comes from and where modern monetary systems come from. And a lot of people get it wrong, So it's sort of my effort to take all that historical legal knowledge, like I said, I consider myself more of a historian than anything else, because I trace back through these things and I try and find those parallels to just bring a little more clarity to what people think about, like, monetary systems and money and how it comes and how we ended up where we are today. And it's also sort of a clarion call to say, hey, we've got to be real careful with this Bitcoin thing, because we have something that's working and you don't want to tinker with it willy-nilly, because it's quite literally the first time in human history that we've ever had a technology like this. And you go, should we just make it so we can do faster transactions so we can get coffee with it? And you just go, no, man, that's not. And I get the impulse, they go, hey, we want black market money. We want, uncensorable transactions where I can just go buy my cocaine or I can go buy anything I want and the government shouldn't know. And I go, I agree with you 1000%. And we're not there yet,
That's coming.
And if you start, yeah, I mean, it can, certainly, there's a lot of ways to get there. But I tend to lean more towards, like, the Saylorian view, if you will, that, like, look, as a Treasury Reserve, this thing has enormous potential to fix a lot of this stuff, because if you start tracing the history, you go, oh, it's an incentive problem. It's not necessarily rooted in, like, oh, there's this evil cabal of people that are trying to do evil things, because as you sort of trace out the history, you go, well, yeah, there's some people that did some pretty crappy things. And yet if you talk to them in the moment and you go, do you think you're evil? They're going to go, no, I'm trying to do the best I can with this chaos around me. And I think the best way you could sort of frame that as an analogy is, like, if you've ever worked with a guy who's like, oh, this assistant manager is a moron. If I was assistant manager, I'd do that. And then as soon as he's assistant manager, he's doing all the same shit the last guy did. And you ask him, like, hey, I thought you were going to fix all this. And he goes, well, I got here and I found out there was all this complexity I wasn't aware of. So now I get why he was doing that. But the manager's an idiot. And when I get to manager, I'm going to fix all the problems. And so they get to manager, and next thing you know, he's, oh shit, now I see why the manager was such an asshole, because this was all broken and it's a pain in the ass. Well, that's true at every layer of the power structure. And Judge Napolitano, I think, was talking to Trump, and it was a video that he had posted, and he said, "Yeah, I asked Trump about the Kennedy thing. I said, how come you promised you're going to release the Kennedy thing? How come you
I know
didn't
exactly
do
what you're
that?"
talking about.
Yeah, and Trump said, "Oh, you don't want to see that, right?" So it's easy for the guy to stand there on the podium and go, "If I get elected, I'm going to release the Kennedy papers." That's just one little thing in the history of the United States. It's not like I'm going to ban the Federal Reserve. It's just like I'm going to release a document that a lot of people probably have a pretty good idea what happened anyway. And he got there and looked at the reality of it and went, "Nope, not doing that. Nope, that's bad."
We're finding out why too. We literally just last couple weeks we're finding out why he.
Yeah.
And it wasn't what I thought originally. That's for sure. Definitely
Oh,
wasn't
for
what I
real?
was thinking. No,
Oh,
completely
what did you
different.
find out? Can you say it, or are we going to get shut down?
Yeah, it's so. Well, it looks like it. Yeah, I probably shouldn't. I'll tell you after. Yeah,
Sounds
yeah,
good,
it's
man.
just something.
We'll leave it
Yeah,
at
it's
that.
definitely one of those topics that'll get you nuked over here on YouTube. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
well, all over the place. Yeah.
it's just not what I thought. I thought it was our government. I thought it was just the CIA. And it turns out there was a couple more parties involved that
yeah.
from other countries and shit like that. So,
Oh, yeah.
and there's
There's a bunch of
some
people.
speculation going around that it looked like his wife was involved too.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if
God.
you've seen that video. It's really interesting
No.
the way like she put her arm around him and then like it looked like maybe she was involved because there was two shooters, and they told us there was only
Right.
one, but there was two.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
anyways,
did
long
see
story
there
short.
was a guy. Yeah, I saw a guy that was a Secret Service agent, and there was this notion that he had accidentally discharged his weapon prior, like in the vehicle before, and that was one of the rounds that struck him, kind of thing. So, I mean, there's so many twists and turns, but ultimately, like if you think of anybody that had access to the documents, it's Trump, and he looked at them, went, "Nope, not saying that." So there's something bad enough in there. But that traces back to that whole idea of like when people are going, "Oh, we should just do this simple solution for this enormously complex problem." You go, you don't know what you're tinkering with, right? Like these are enormous forces, and there's enormous momentum behind them, and you move stuff fast at great risk is kind of what
Yeah.
I'm getting at.
And Sailor said, he said, to touch on what you said about good intentions, evil people at the time, you know, Sailor does the analogy, like there was doctors that George Washington got sick and they bled him to death, right? You're talking about the
Right.
most important man at the time in the world. And the doctors
Right.
that thought they were doing good bled him to death. I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
people have
killed them.
great intentions and they fucking kill you, right? Like, so, you know,
Exactly. Exactly. And and the trouble is once you get into power, like it's real easy, especially in our system, to kind of start deluding yourself into believing like, well, this is something special about me. And I think Sailor even talks about that. He goes, there's a history of these great conquerors that come along and go, "I'm the guy that can fix it," and then
mhm.
they try and fix it and they get wrecked, because it the the system that we exist in right now is born of such enormous complexity, and it's such an amazing feat that we even got where we are, that we haven't
Yeah.
just absolutely nuked ourselves already. And every day is sort of wading through that. And I saw it firsthand in the prisons, because you go, "Oh yeah, these people know what they're doing." You go, "No, no idea." I mean, they're bungling through steps every single
Yep.
way. And it's the same thing if you get to the federal government. There's thousands of people pulling in all kinds of different directions with all kinds of different incentives, and they all think they're doing the right thing, and none of them is getting it right anywhere.
Hmm.
So what you end up with is just this weird thing that's slowly collapsing around us, and you kind of go, "Oh well, how do we fix that?" And you go, "Well, there is one corner piece or one centerpiece to all this, and it's
Hmm.
the money. And as soon as you fix that, then a lot of this stuff starts writing itself,
You
and
said
and that's oh, go ahead, sir.
you had said you're a historian, and you've always been doing a lot of research. Have you been studying like the collapses of previous civilizations and how their money structures or their devaluing of their currencies has led? And my main question with that is how hard is it when you're doing that type of research to know what's true and what's not? Like how many times have you thought you knew something and then you started digging a little deeper, you uncovered some other hidden information out there that just kind of disagrees with like what the narrative that they told us about history? Have you come across anything like that?
Oh yeah, endlessly, and that's one of the beauties of legal research. Like in 1998, I ran for office as a libertarian. Like I was a hardcore libertarian gold bug guy. Like I was full on, right? And by the time I got to law school and sort of got through that and had read like where the law comes from, because I was probably leaning towards that sovereign citizen, sort of like I am a emperor unto myself with subjects of none kind of thing. And by the time I kind of got through the legal history, I was like, oh, that was a little silly, and it was disappointing in a way because I had this really simple narrative of the world that was sort of guiding my decisions and actions and thinking. And to have that sort of blown up a little bit because of that exact effect that you just mentioned, like you unpack one thing and you go, oh, well, that wasn't quite that, it was this. And then you unpack something else and
Wait.
unpack something else. Yeah.
So you're talking about these people that walk around and go, listen, I'm not a citizen in the United States. I renounce my citizenship. They're a corporation. And like, I don't appeal to their corporation. You're telling me
Yeah.
that the beginning narrative of that is all bullshit and that's not really a thing?
Yeah. I mean, if you really
Please
start boiling it down, like
unpack that for
it,
me.
well, I mean, the whole idea there, I can see where people get tripped up by it. Right. And yet, if you look at like the nature of authority, how authority flows, where power comes from, where these structures are developed from, then that sort of narrative falls apart a little bit. And like I used to get letters, like I worked in the prison library for a minute right before I left. And there would be guys that would be putting out these petitions for, like they shouldn't be in prison because they're not subject to US laws and all this kind of, and they'd have all this like, but if you read it from a legal standpoint, like as a person who's trained in the law, you look at it and go, this is just nonsense. Like it doesn't hold up to any sort of legal scrutiny. And I think a lot of those folks, if they actually bothered to study the law beyond their confirmation bias, they'd go, oh, I'm not really making a good case here, And so without getting into like the gory details, what I can say is I believed in a lot of that stuff, like not quite to that extent where I'd say laws don't apply to me and, I'll get in a shootout with cops if they ask me for my license kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I was certainly down that path. I was probably closer to like an ANCAP kind of guy. And it was through that study of law, like through a detailed study of the law, that you start seeing like, where does that notion of like the right to self-defense come from? And what are the problems with the right to self-defense? And what does it mean to own property? And how does property get translated down, and property rights? And, because people talk about like, oh, I need my property rights. And you go, well, that's granted by the sovereign. And without the sovereign, you go, how do you defend your property rights? So by force. Okay, so if someone comes and honks you on the head, then they get your land? Well, no, of course not. I mean, I have justice on my side. And you go, well, where's that come from?
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of unwind this to a certain level where it ultimately just ends up breaking down into power structures anyway. I mean, it's unavoidable that you end up in some sort of power structure if you're talking about competitive resource capture and how that looks. But you take that to the other extreme and you end up where we are now, where it's like Bill Gates is buying up all the farmland. You go, how does that happen? Well, because of property rights and because of sovereign capture and sovereign rights and sovereign control of territory. And so the ultimate end goal of that is you go, oh, so if I capture enough fiat bucks, like Uncle Biden bucks or whatever, I can just buy all the land in the world. And you go, yeah, that's okay. That's private property. And, it's most natural, development of that, right? You go, well, that doesn't sound like a great plan. Like I don't necessarily want to get to the place where Bill Gates gets to own all the land, but that is rooted in the same sort of concepts of private property. And if you go to the ANCAP thing and you go, well, what if I just turned into Superman? Could I just go around and knock everybody out and take all the land because they can't take it back? And you go, well, yeah, that's libertarian freedom, right? Like, and so these structures that develop around that come from those conflicts and come from those trying to settle those kind of various mechanisms and disputes and trying to figure out rules, right? But they're rules for competition, just like rules in football. And you go, well, are you allowed to kick a guy in the nuts no, you can't do that. Okay, well, what if I accidentally brush him with my knee in the nuts? And you go, well, if you did it with this intent, but you start getting in these little fine detailed things about like, what are the rules? And so competition by its very nature invites people to look for advantage, right? The funny thing is, if you remove the competitive side of things, like if you look at the way Native Americans sort of govern things, and you go, they wouldn't compete for land. Like there wasn't like, if there were two tribes hunting in the northeast portion of what's now the United States, if one tribe came across a valley and the other tribe was already there hunting, they wouldn't go down and go, nope, we're here, we're going to go fight over who's going to hunt. They just go somewhere else, And And what you find is like if you sort of strip away agricultural and animal husbandry, you find humans tend to be very cooperative. And that's one of the beautiful things I think about Jeff Booth and the way he frames things is like, look, if you get rid of some of this artifice, like people are amazing and people get along really well. It's fundamental to our survival. Like our survival is not predicated on competition. Our survival is predicated on cooperation. And if you really want to boil it down, like let's say you and your worst enemy in the world crash your plane and you end up in the Canadian wilderness, and your worst enemy in the world is great at making bows and arrows, and you're really great at making clothes. Are you guys going to sit there and fight about who gets the bow and arrow? You're going to go, no, you're going to put those differences aside so you can survive, right? And that's what human cooperation looks like at the survival threshold. If you start removing that and you start going, well, I can just gather all the goats and they're my goats. And you go, well, hey, but I'm hungry. How come you get all the goats? Because I got them. I go, well, I can bonk you on the head and take your goats. And so you start getting these honor systems that develop around like who gets to have goats and who gets to own stuff. But it becomes a competition for things. Yeah. And the thing about humans is we need both, so it's a tough road to travel. I feel like I'm babbling here, but
no, you're right on target, man. I like Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've read any of his work, but he did a book called Leaders Eat Last, right? And he talks about, back in the old days, the largest alpha male in the tribe would eat first, right? So like the kings, the people that survive, right? Because the idea as a leader eats last is that you want the alpha male, right? At the front of the line, you want him eating first, right? You also want him mating with the prettiest female of the tribe, right? The idea is that like he's the dude when shit gets real that's at the front lines, and you're the dude, right, leading right from the back. But these are these soldiers on the front line. So like the idea is like survival of the fittest. Like you want those people to have, the ability to reproduce with the best offspring because their offspring are going to protect your tribe kind of thing, Yeah. And it's that similar power structure that is kind of has led us this far. And Eric Stacks talks about, he goes, like the people that question Bitcoin, I think everybody does it, or at least some of the best minds in Bitcoin are the ones that were questionable at first. Sailor questioned it at first, right? A lot of these people have. I'm sure you did. I probably did.
Oh yeah.
And Eric says that we're the people that survived, right? Because our ancestors were like, oh, maybe if it's too good to be true, it is. We're going to kind of step off the edge of this cliff while you guys go walk out on that bridge over there. But, good luck.
Right.
And we're here and we survived. Like it's I don't know. I don't really know where I was going with that, but.
No, I mean, it's a valid point, right? I think I'm familiar with the name. I don't think I've read the book, right? But, and I'm glad you brought up like the alpha male thing. I actually touch on that in that part about power, right? And one of the things, like when you discuss power, you go, okay, what's it mean to be in power? And people go, well, because I'm in control. Okay, what's it mean to be in control? And so when you start trying to break out and parse out what that language means, it gets sticky pretty quick, right? You start going, oh, well, I didn't really know what I meant when I said this person's in power or this country is powerful and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of that can be traced to like the Darwinian notion, right? You go survival of the fittest, and people sort of bastardize that to mean like only the strongest survive. And you go, well, that's not really what he said. What he said was, those that are best able to reproduce will survive. Yeah. And so when you start talking about alpha males and things like that, like I think wolves are held out as like the prototypical, like this is the leader of the pack and they're the strongest and they won their dominance by, subjugating some other lesser males, and then they get first crack at the food, first crack at the best looking babes, and et cetera, et cetera. And the trouble with it is it's not true, right? Like the way they came up with that alpha pack sort of hierarchy was by viewing captive wolves. But if you look at the wolves in the wild, you kind of go, oh, it looks more like mom and dad. And the way they act is very different, and they take care of the little ones and they make sure that the elderly are fed. And so there's a lot of cooperation and cohesion and sort of group management that comes with that leadership position, right? But it's not necessarily the biggest, the baddest, and whatnot. And there's I can't remember the term, it's in the book, but antagonistic pleiotropy, where you go like, okay, I'm the biggest, I'm the strongest, but there's a metabolic cost to that, right? Like you go, okay, well, I'm not going to live as long because I got to eat more and I got to do this, and I'm going to decay faster and stuff like that. And the trouble you run into with evolution is you go, well, what if you're like a little skinny guy and you're kind of getting by and you get to reproduce for 40 years, but your big muscle guy with the big horns, the guy with the big claws or whatever, paid a higher metabolic cost. He died when he's 25. So he got to breed with the best at the time, but you got to keep breeding after he's gone. So you go, well, which one prevails? And you kind of go, it's tricky. You know, like
Yeah.
when you start boiling it down, it gets a little trickier. So those dominance hierarchies that get paraded around is like, this is the natural order of things. Like if you actually look at the natural order, you go, well, it's a little trickier than that. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with all this stuff. Is I go, people say, oh, money is this, we should smash the Fed. And I go, well, you do that, you unwind about 600 years of development. And you go, what's it look like when you smash the Fed? And I go, well, go ask the people in Argentina in 1998. And what it looks like is you wake up one day, you go to the bank, you go, I want my money. And they go, there is no money. What do you mean there is no money? You go, it's just not there. It's gone. You go, oh, okay. Well, shit. How am I supposed to get to work? And go, I don't know. No money. And then you go to the store and you go, hey, where's all the food? And they go, oh, well, we got looted the second everyone figured out there was no money. You go, oh, so where do I get my food? And go, you don't. Like, I hope you know how to pick berries because you're screwed. Hope you save some beans or whatever. And it takes all of about 3 weeks of that for people to be pretty much eating each other in the streets because they just don't, they can't tolerate that level of chaos. And especially us now, modern men, we are at best domesticated animals. I mean, like if you threw me out in the Canadian wilderness, and I'm a pretty smarty pants kind of guy, provided I don't get sick, provided I don't break my leg, provided I don't get a punctured lung, provided I don't get an infection, provided I don't eat the wrong thing, provided all these ifs, ands, and maybes and buts, I might be able to make it if I can find fresh water. Chances are good though that I'm dead within 2 or 3 weeks. And there's this little select sliver of human beings that can track animals and do all this crazy, build a bow. But if you really start breaking it down, you go, a lot of that's going to be luck. And a lot of it's going to be like, oh, you didn't fall off that rock when you're chasing the rabbit, or you didn't, have a rock fall on your head and you get a big cut and then it gets infected and then you're dead anyway. So if or when I think people start talking about like, hey, we need to, upend the system, I go, well, yeah, do you really? Because you don't know what that looks like. And if you look at Russia when it failed, you kind of go, how'd that look? Wasn't pretty. I mean, people were hungry and they didn't quite end up eating each other. But what's going to happen is there's going to be some new authority that comes in, just like they did in Russia and turned into a mob state. And just like Argentina, the socialists rolled in and just have wrecked it ever since. And then the new power structure. Yeah, Venezuela, all of them.
Highest standard of living in the world in 2001. Look at them now.
Yeah, and now it's destitute, backwards country.
You see Iran in 1950 or Afghanistan in 1950?
Yeah. Oh yeah, beautiful,
dude. It was women everywhere, long hair, none of the hijabs or anything like that. It was just completely looked like America back then almost.
Correct.
Like I couldn't freaking believe that. I go,
yeah,
like that's amazing, the type of history that we really weren't taught about. Like you see Iraq and Afghanistan now, and you think it was always this like terrorist, just like shacks and huts, and in this vast empty desert. And it's just that wasn't the case. It was beautiful cities and towns and colleges and families and businesses were thriving. And it's like, whoa. And then you start to really realize, like, pretty much since the World War I, the United States has been the absolute bad guy. Like we've destroyed cities, we destroyed countries, we destroyed towns, we've we've probably killed more people than every world war combined. If you talk about all the bombs we dropped, all the lives we killed, and all over our control over this freaking money printer.
Yeah. Well, I would remind folks that we're the only country that's ever dropped a nuke in anger, and we did that on a civilian population twice. So you kind of go, yeah, we're the good guys. Right? I mean, it's a hard argument to make. And yet that also traces me back to like, if you go talk to somebody who works in the State Department, you go talk to somebody who works at NSA or CIA, I guarantee you're not going to be sitting across a guy who's got big, long black fingernails and got horns out of his head. You're going to be finding some relatively boring bean counter that you kind of go, you're the source of all of the great evil in the world. And you go, well, kind of, but you don't understand what it looks like if we don't do this. And you kind of go, I disagree with you 100%. I don't think you should do that. And yet I'm not privy to that next level of information. And again, there's that idea that you can go, I can assume bad intentions. Everybody, all these people are evil and they're doing this for evil reasons and they want to drink baby blood and whatever it is. Or you can look at it, which I think is more appropriate. You kind of go, well, people are generally trying to do what they think is right most of the time. And they might recognize, their hard decisions, but it's kind of the difference. Like you remember Game of Thrones, there's Littlefinger and Varys, and Littlefinger sitting there going, chaos is a ladder. Right? Like, I want the chaos because I can get power. And the other guy's going, no. We need to preserve the realm. We need stability because chaos sucks. And they both do horrible things. They're both horrible human beings. And if you tried to draw them out on a piece of paper and go, who did more good than the other? You go, you can't. You wouldn't be able to. But if you look at the intention of the one compared to the intention of the other, you go, well, one guy was trying to preserve as much life as possible amidst the chaos by using the chaos or beating back the chaos. The other guy was seeking chaos so he could enrich himself. And the hope is that you have more of the Varys of the world running things and less of the little fingers. But the way the incentive structure is built now, I fear that we're getting more and more of the little fingers. And those guys, it's kind of like pigs at a trough. You're going to go, well, everyone's scrambling. If I don't scramble, someone else is going to scramble in front of me. I may as well scramble. And then you end up with these bank bailouts and this and that. I mean, like it sort of permeates all the way out. So if we can get that incentive structure fixed, at a sort of base layer, then I think a lot of these, if you make that assumption of people working from good intentions and you go, well, those good intentions will naturally start aligning towards good outcomes rather than, the better of two evil outcomes kind of thing.
Walk me through what does it look like as far as like you feel like the collapse of Rome, they tell us that it was the devaluing of their currency. Now we're starting to learn a little bit more about World War II, like that, it seemed like that they were forcing massive amounts of migrants into Germany, and they were devaluing their currency, and they were forcing them to use a currency that was just, they were printing out of thin air, and it was hyperinflating, and their civilization in Germany was just getting destroyed by this global elite that were forcing it upon them. And finally, then they got a leader that just snapped and was like, no, we're not going to take it anymore. And I look back at Rome, and too, we were told that they were, shaving the coinage and devaluing the currency. And it seems like, does your government just automatically drive itself into its own demise? Because it seems like that's what's happening now. Like you said, you don't want it to completely break, but how close? I mean, we have to be getting close to the system. Enough people going. I mean, it just seems like every day I wake up and there's more and more people that are like, oh, teach me about this Bitcoin thing. I got to get out of the system.
Yeah.
The Fed's getting hit from every angle. Inflation's going back up. Nothing they're doing is working. They've lost full control over the media narrative. Is there any hope that this, I guess, doesn't implode on itself? Or is it almost like Bitcoin? I know Bitcoin can save us from that implosion if the government was like actively wanting to save its citizens. But what if the government doesn't want to save its citizens?
Well, there is that, and I mean, I kind of give it like a 60-40 right now, like honestly. In terms of
which direction? Imploding or not imploding?
Not imploding. But it's not; those aren't great odds, right? Like, like if someone said, "Hey, you got a 60% chance or a 40% chance of dying if you get on that plane," you go, "I'm not getting on that plane," right? Like yeah, exactly.
Man.
So if you go, you got a 40% chance of your currency collapsing, you go, I don't like that.
Yeah, not too good.
No, it's terrible, right? But the thing is like the idea of like sooner or later people are going to learn, and then they'll rise up, and then they'll we'll take back the system or whatever. They won't. I mean that. And if you want to go back to World War II, like probably the most striking example I can draw was like the Warsaw Ghetto. And if you know anything about the Warsaw ghettos in Poland, when the Germans first rolled in there, they walled off a part of the city and they put all the Jewish people into one section. And there's about 400,000 Polish Jews at the time, and they would just cart them off about 1,000 at a time. And the thing is, the narrative that was going on at the time was not like, hey, we're going to send you off to this camp and then we're going to put you in a hole. They go, oh, we're just going to relocate your family and they're going to go over here. And and then so it wasn't until the population of the Warsaw Ghetto got down to about 3,000 or 4,000 people that someone looked around and went, hey, they're not coming back. And it's been a long time and things are getting pretty crappy. Maybe we should fight back. And you go, so you had this 95% drawdown on your population before anyone woke up, started building grenades and actually fighting. Because the narrative is never, we're here to hurt you, right? The narrative is always, we're here to help you. And they're going to do horrible things in the name of helping you. So, like, if people were going to fight back, I go, well, 2001 came and everyone just shit their pants and just gave up all freedom overnight, like, because a couple of buildings got knocked down. And rightfully so. It's terrifying, but that whole period, I lived through it and I watched it happen and I went, oh man, this is scary. And I also remember going like, these are terrible, terrible ideas. 2 people stood up on a congressional floor and said, we shouldn't be passing this law. Ron Paul, of all people, bless his heart, and some Democrat from California. And you go, how is it that out of the 460 some members of Congress, only 2 bothered to say, hey, this is a bad idea? One of the things most people don't realize about the Patriot Act is Section 3 is devoted entirely to money laundering. It's the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommended rules. And that was dreamed up by a bunch of Americans in the mid 90s. They tried to pass those rules in 98. They said, hey, we're going to do this new thing. We got to know your customer and you got to do this and that and the other thing. The entire American public said, absolutely not. What are you talking about? That's my money. You don't get to, I don't have to tell you who I am or where I'm spending my money. You're not going to deputize every banker to ask me interrogation questions every time I want to take out more than $5,000. And then 9/11 happened. And then they just went, oh, well, this is a good time to put those rules in because no one's looking. And they did. And it's like 1/3 of the Patriot Act is devoted to money laundering, despite the fact it had nothing to do with terrorism, it had nothing to do with the attacks, it had nothing to do with anything. But if people were going to fight back, you go, why didn't you fight back then? And you go, well, let's trace it back to 1970 and the Bank Secrecy Act. You go, how come you didn't fight it then? That was the first time when people said, hey, you're not allowed to spend the money that you made the way you want. You go, why is that okay? Like prior to that, the entire 150 years prior to that, that was it would have been nonsensical. You go, what do you mean? I have to tell you where I got my money from. Like, it's insane, right? But by 1970, they just kowtowed to it. 2001, they kowtowed to it. So you look fast forward now, 2008, they just bailed out all the banks. They go, yeah. I mean, the worst that came out of that was Occupy Wall Street. And they go, yeah, a bunch of people pitched a tent, threw a fit, and then they got thrown out. And that was the end. The bankers still got bailed out, and nothing changed, right?
What are your thoughts on at every single previous point that you spoke of there? They had full control over the media, right? Like the CIA and Project Mockingbird. I mean, they've been running the media for as long as the media's been around, right? So like 100%. Having the ability to persuade or for an independent person, or like now we have social media and we can rally behind these causes. I mean, we bankrupted Bud Light overnight, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are your thoughts about now with the information and the access to information? Do you think that they can...
I mean, it's certainly dampening their ability to do stuff, right? Like
or do they want chaos? Do you think that's the idea now? Is now they want the chaos?
They very well could. And part of the problem is it's sort of self-referencing anyway, because like if you look at the amount of information that people are getting hammered with, like if you trace back to the American Revolutionary War and you go Common Sense by Thomas Paine, right? That got circulated wildly. And people were reading it and they're pouring over it and they're talking about it in taverns, and they were rallying behind this one little cause. And you go, yeah, this is the thing. The British are unfair and we're getting a 2% tax on our tea and whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you think about like how many other sources of information did they have at that point? You go, well, they had a Bible and they maybe had a newspaper that came out once a week. And, I mean, like, it wasn't like they were just being bombarded with, life that we exist in right now. Mm-hmm. So it's like the ability to marshal those resources and get that sort of everybody on board on going in the same direction made a lot more sense back then, because you weren't just getting inundated with social media information. And right now, like, for every point someone makes about Trump, there's 1,000 people posting 1,000 things that are completely opposite of it. And for most people, they go like, how am I going to parse through this? You go, they're not. They just kind of give up on it. And they go, I'm just going to watch football and not give a shit. And then once in a while, they might bitch on TikTok about how they can't buy groceries anymore, how Big Mac used to cost $4, now it's $8, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that could be very well like, hey, let's sow some chaos. Or it could just be like, that's just kind of how things developed with open communication and decentralized communication. And again, that's one of the things I love about Bitcoin, because it almost doesn't matter where you're coming from. Like, there's people that get into Bitcoin because they go, I want freedom money. There's people that get into it go because I want to smash the state, or I want this. But everyone's focused on one thing. And they go, oh, what are you looking at? They go, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to fix this. And it doesn't matter if they dicker on the margins. There's a unified purpose in that. And it's a single point of rallying that you kind of go, hey, look, do you not like the way the criminal justice system is working? Well, Bitcoin can fix that, because it changes the incentives in this thing, and it changes the incentives of this, and it can realign these things, and it removes power from these things. You go, okay, that's pretty cool. And you go, hey, I hate that financial privacy is eroding. You go, okay, great. Well, why do they track this, and why do they do that, and where do these power structures come from? And you go, well, if you put Bitcoin on the books, and all of a sudden it starts realigning those incentives, and you go, oh, there's less reason for us to worry about that, because we're not so busy trying to track down tax cheats, is kind of where AML came from. And it's great because it sort of ties all that together. You go, hey, there's this open communication, and everyone can talk about things and think about the best way to fix their specific pet problem. But you go, at the root cause of this, there's an incentive misalignment that goes back 2,000 years, 1,000 years here in the West, at least. You go, what's that? Oh, the money system and who controls the money and how they print it. You go, oh, so if we take that away, what does the world look like? And you go, well, it starts changing pretty quick. And not only is it that single point of focus for everybody, it's a rallying point, but it doesn't hurt anybody by owning it, right? Like if you go, hey, I'm gonna, defund the police, you go, oh, someone's gonna get hurt by that. Whether you're a cop that goes, hey, I don't want to be defunded, I like my job, or if you're a city or whoever, you go, these are not, someone's gonna oppose you on that. You go, hey, I'm gonna hold Bitcoin on my books, and you go, well, I don't give a shit, like what difference does that make to me, right? But it works for everybody. If the central banks start putting Bitcoin on the books instead of loading up on toxic securities and all these shitty assets that are never going to recover, you go, that helps them. If the corporations do it, that helps them. And that was one of the things Eric Stacks brought up that was so brilliant. And it sort of flipped my thinking on this. I was like, oh yeah, that's the thing, right? That's the thing. It doesn't hurt anybody. It can start slowly realigning these economic incentives. And you can see it. It's visible in every single person that gets into Bitcoin. Yep. You watch them 3 months after they get into it, and they go, my life's better. Yeah. I'm not so worried about this. I'm not focused on this 100% of the time. And you go, hey, man, that's true. That's just as true for me as it is true for you, as it's going to be true for the bankers at JP Morgan, as it's going to be for the central bankers. It's just a matter of when, and that's to sort of take the really long-winded route around your very simple question, is that, yes, I think there is a mechanism that can preserve a lot of the things that we've come to enjoy and like being able to go down to the store and have a selection of your clothes and not collapse everything at the same time without impinging upon other people and their sort of machinations and stuff like that. So,
it's Eric says I love his optimism, man. It's like, this is the big fucking deal. Like, this is the biggest fucking deal of all of human fucking history. There's no second best. Bitcoin's gonna fucking change the world. And he goes, you know what's even better? He's like, we won the fucking war, dude. He goes, it's over. He goes, you guys are out there, and he specifically talks about me because I do my show on LFA TV. So he's like, you put on this toxic suit, and he's like, I'm grateful for people like you because you it's like you put in this suit and you like go back into this toxic fucking world of like filth and crime and corruption. And you're over there trying to like help people. And then there's this beautiful world over here that you're also standing in. Like, you take off that suit, you come over here like, guys, listen, man, like I just came back from the greatest place ever, and it's called Bitcoin world. And he goes, it's open for everybody. And there's no drama. There's no negativity. He goes, we've already won the war. Like, I'm already in the winner's circle. It's like, so you can leave this clown world anytime you want. You can come over here and join us because it's a fucking big deal. And then like, I just sent him a message last night. I go, it didn't really register when he goes, we're going to give private property rights to everybody in the world. And then I finally it just hit me yesterday. I go, holy fuck. You're talking about and like, if you don't own property and you don't own an asset, right? And you're just working a 9 to 5 and you rent everything, like, life sucks for you. You are trapped in that rat race for fucking ever. And if you haven't bought a house now at the rate that they're going up, you're pretty much priced out of buying one for all of eternity, unless you win the lotto, you hit a jackpot, you get this mega rich bonus at work or something exponentially changes in your life, which nobody's looking at their life going, yeah, my life's getting a lot better. I mean, Bitcoiners are, I am, but like most people aren't, right? Like, they're suffering right now. And then so you really start to understand what private property rights are and what private property is. And you really realize like you didn't need to own 100 pieces of real estate, right? Just one would have at the very least kept you in the game. You know what I'm saying? If you owned a couple, then you kind of got ahead because you're parking your capital in something that's appreciating almost faster than the rate that our government's printing, money into oblivion. So even though things are costing more, you're able to maintain that level. And I'm thinking about like these people in these third world countries, like $5 a week into Bitcoin 4 years from now will be like exponentially like changing their life. And you just see that in just constantly. And then everybody around the world's trying to buy something and it's always benefiting everybody, right? We all start buying this asset. We're all going to and it lifts up the entire world. Even if you're not into Bitcoin, like Eric was saying, he goes, it's a benefit for you because all of that capital is not chasing something that you're trying to buy, right? Like all this money,
100%.
People are always going to serve their self-interest. And Eric looks at it like, he's like, yeah, I get there's some really rich people out there. And yeah, maybe Bill Gates is buying up all the farmland. And yeah, maybe that's because, you know, he's this evil guy, and you're like probably right, but like at the same time, he's also serving his self-interest, right? He figured a way to park his money in the place that it's going to be the most lucrative for him. So eventually, right, everybody else starts going, yeah, maybe I don't want to go and start up this, you know, this rental company. Maybe I don't want to buy an apartment complex. Maybe I just want to stack Bitcoin because the Bitcoin's going to be more profitable. And even Michael Saylor is like, why would you go start up a company and raise, let's just say $50 million, right, to start up this whatever? He goes, you're better to raise 100, right? Start whatever company you want and then put 50 million of it into Bitcoin, right? And then your company can't fail because at that point you have an asset that's appreciating at a rate of 20% per year. He goes, what business do you know that you start off in the first year is going to make you 20%? It's like,
none.
It's like, so you're now even almost incentivized to kind of start a business, raise capital to buy Bitcoin, and that's all your business does. It just buys Bitcoin with other people's money. You know, it's pretty fucking wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's genius. And what Eric Stacks said, I mean, you're spot on 100%. I agree with you across the board, you know, because it realigns all that stuff. I mean, that's the title of my book, The Great Realignment. I go, it realigns so many things on so many levels. But the point about private property, right? You go, okay, well, as we were just discussing earlier, you go, well, where does that concept of private property come from? You go, it's land. Who owns the land? The sovereign. The sovereign distributes, the sovereign taxes, the sovereign can give, and the sovereign can take away. So you never can truly own land. Bill Gates, he may be buying stuff, but there is zero stopping the next, you know, regime coming in. Like Trump can go, hey, we're going to divest you of all your land, asshole, because we are the sovereign. We ultimately have authority over this land. Bitcoin changes that fundamentally. You go, oh, who's the sovereign of Bitcoin? Fucking 600 terahash is what that is, or exahash. You know, you go, you're sovereign not because it's granted to you by some leader, some ruler. You're sovereign in that property right, that one fundamental property right. But having just a loose version of that in the United States made us the greatest country in the world. Like anybody can come here and get some land, and that's their land, and they get to hang on to it. And that was the source of mass prosperity in this nation. So if you grant that to somebody digitally and you grant it to everybody in the world simultaneously, it's enormous. I mean, it is such a game changer. And I love the way you put it, and I love the way Eric puts it, because that's the sort of message that I will die on that hill. I'm writing books and giving them away just to push that idea. Like, you don't understand how big this is. So if you want to tinker about like talking about buying coffee with it, and I go, that's such a 14th order, who gives a flying hoot. You're talking about giving somebody property rights in Ethiopia and somebody in Nigeria and somebody in China. You know, it's huge, man. So yeah, that's great.
That's why I was talking to you a little bit before we went live about this documentary that me and Eric are talking about making, and how we were going to, you know, you're giving away your book for free, and we were talking about giving this documentary away for free, and like what the topic was going to be. And I was just like, man, like, dude, like, how do we make like a 1 or 2 hour documentary about Bitcoin, and make it the most positive and most optimistic? Like, can you go on I was like, can you go on a rant of yours for like 1 hour straight about everything that's like the most positive, optimistic, like we've won the war type of like mentality, and like, let's make a documentary around, there's this huge world that's happening, this parallel economy that's being built on top of this protocol that's called Bitcoin, you know? And it's like Jeff Booth explains it like the internet, you know, like the first version, the second version, like the internet didn't get great until like the 4th or 5th version of it. And here we are right now, and we're like, whoa, this thing's really powerful. It's going to change every aspect of life as we know it. And you have this thing that's called Bitcoin, and it's doing the same thing, but it's so early. And you see people like Andrew Tate going, I'm going to sell. It's just now today. I'm done. Fuck the banks. I'm done. $100 million. I'm putting it all into Bitcoin, and I'm going to prove it. And I'm like, things are about to get really freaking interesting, because now people are like I forget what Michelle, you know, Michelle Weekly, right? She just tweeted out what she tweeted out over here. Oh yeah, this was it. I'll throw it up here on the screen. She said, this is one of my favorite things that she says. She says, this is why we Bitcoin. And Usual Whale said yesterday, former SEC chair said that Roaring Kitty manipulated GameStop by tweeting memes. Today, Senator Tommy Tuberville is trading options on companies he legislates, and Pelosi's portfolio hit an all-time high, but the SEC is silent. You're like,
yeah, that's it. That's exactly right.
It's not long. I mean, everybody's waking up. We're like, right, there's this elite group of people that are just like extremely like profiting from the collapse of America, and like these people are above the law, And the only thing that they understand is money and power, right? And in order for us to put them in check, we need to take that money away, like their ability to just profit from all of the pain. And the incentive structure is so broken when you're paying $1 you're paying $1 for a gallon of gas, and the government makes, say, 6 cents in sales tax, right? And then that same gallon of gas goes up to $3, not because of anything that you did, but because of horrible government policies. And then now that government's making 18 cents a gallon because it's $3, or 30 cents a gallon because it's $6. You're like, holy shit! The worse they behave, the more they're incentivized. And you go, this is, like, I wish I maxed out my credit card every time I did that, and they just paid it off and gave me a higher balance. Like, how is it? How do we play that game? You're like, oh wait,
well,
only they
that's it though. Is if they had half a brain in their head, they would just route that to Bitcoin instead, right? I mean, if you go, they're powered by greed. If you take that just as that pure statement, these people are powered by greed, nothing else. You go, well, what's the greediest thing you could do? Is ape fucking Bitcoin and then tell everybody you did it. And pardon me for the F-bomb, but
drop all the fuck you want.
all right, fair enough. I don't know. And yet, if you think about that, you go, well, that's rational self-interest for some greedy bastard. Just like it's rational self-interest for you to hold some Bitcoin on the books and go, yeah, well, my savings isn't getting diluted by these baboons that are trying to do stupid shit all the time. And so when you start framing that out, like, the Wisconsin pension board, you go, they bought $162 million in Bitcoin. You go, it's an ETF, whatever. The point is that's the 10th largest pension fund in America, holds Bitcoin on the books. I can still go walk down to the coffee store right now and go, hey, who wants to learn about Bitcoin? You'll hear the whole room, oh God, we fucking idiot, get out of here. It's like, and I go, you don't understand what you're missing here, right? Mm-hmm. And yet when the one pension fund does it, some other pension fund, there's 50 of those guys across the country going, wait, what? Where? How come? And those orange pills start coming faster and faster. And the thing I'd like to tell people is, like, if you remember the 21 blow off top market, the 2 peak, that was retail baboons with COVID stimulus checks, right? Mm-hmm. Like, people just going, hey man, I don't have to go to work and I got an extra $1,200 just, and so that moonshot was just from helicopter money, right? Mm-hmm. I go, what does it look like when the helicopter money is coming from JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs? And I go, you have no idea what this thing is going to look like. And when they start FOMOing, because they will, because that's their survival is dependent. Like, you just saw what happened to the Vanguard guy. We're not taking Bitcoin. Okay, you're fired. Who'd they bring in? The guy that, created IBIT, right? So you go, oh, well, somebody is paying attention. People with a lot of money are paying attention. Larry Fink is up there shilling Bitcoin, and people are rolling their eyes at him. Like, that TV goof was up there making fun of Larry Fink. I'm like, if that guy was pitching, some meme stock or something, that guy would be flying out of his shoes to go buy that stock. But the second he says Bitcoin, he's like, oh, well, how come you want to buy it? And I'm like, do you know who you're talking to right now? Like, this guy isn't just some man in the world. Yeah. And he's shilling Bitcoin, and he sounds a lot like a Bitcoiner. Now, I don't know if he's legit orange pilled. He could just be the most evil whatever guy in the world. Or there's a possibility he's just like every other human being that gets involved in Bitcoin, starts thinking about it, starts doing a little research, goes, oh, this is a better idea. I don't know. I can't tell you.
Yeah, he's smart enough to know that he doesn't want to be on the opposite side of it at the very least.
Exactly. So, and there's more and more people. And when that tsunami of people start flooding in, I was just telling a couple guys at work, the maintenance guys, I'm like, hey man, this is your first time in human history you can front run those assholes. So maybe hop on, dude. Get off zero, because it's,
And it's going to be such an amazing journey to see this all play out. And I know we've already gone over that hour mark. I could talk all night. I just wanted to be respectful of your time. I wanted to make sure you don't have a hard stop or anything that you have to run right away. I mean, we keep this conversation going. I could invite you back on anytime, and it's up to you.
Yeah, it's totally fine, man. I want to respect your audience's time too, and I'll probably start repeating myself pretty quick here. So
sounds good.
But man, yeah, I'm happy to chat, man. It was a lot of fun. I tend to babble, so I appreciate you. Your patience with me.
No, man, that's my job. You're the second person who said that. I go, no, man, when I interview people, it's taken me a long time to realize, like, nobody gives a fuck about what you have to say, Matta. It's like all about your guest. So
I don't know if that's true, man. I like what you have to say.
It's my job to keep you talking as much as possible, and me say as very little as possible. And that's kind of how these interviews just keep getting better and better. The less I talk and the more I just listen. And it's an honor to have people on like you that share so much knowledge, and love what you're working on with that book. I want to tell everybody where they can find you again over here on on Twitter and tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah. So Great Alignment. It's like I said, it's about a 4-part book. The first part sort of goes through the history of money, and there's some nice historical stuff. Lynn Alden just put out a really cool video, kind of touches on some of these topics. But I have a bunch of shitcoin articles up there, and you can sort of see my transition from shitcoiner to Bitcoiner. And a lot of it's kind of embarrassing. Most of it was sort of shitting on the shitcoin thing, but it was still sort of trying to profit off of it. But now it's just Bitcoin only. So the part of the book I'm working on right now is power structures, and that's sort of how we ended up talking about a lot of that kind of stuff. Next step is greed, and then I'm going to talk about Bitcoin and sort of how that realigns things, just like we've been talking about here. And none of it's going to be groundbreaking, I don't think, but I think a lot of the historical insight into like money and power, I think, will be illuminating for a lot of folks when they kind of parse through it and they go, "Oh, I never really thought of things that way." Which I think is helpful because it helps these conversations move forward, and it helps people be a little more understanding, a little more patient with people. And so you can find that on tinmoney.medium.com. That's tin like the pot metal and money like money. And then I'm Tin Money TV on Twitter if you want to follow me over there and watch me natter on occasionally about semi-funny stuff.
Man, I appreciate it. I think I wanted to throw that last thing I was going to say. Maybe we can save this for the next time. Is like you had talked about like Nancy Pelosi and these politicians, and it's weird. It's like they're insider trading, right? And they're doing all these things, and a lot of these politicians are basically breaking laws by insider trading. But technically, when they do it, it's not breaking a law for some reason. But a lot of these people are doing it to make 15, 20, some of them are making 30, 40, 50% a year, right? But then you start to see Bitcoin, you go, this thing's going up, at like 63% a year. So even as a corrupt politician, right? If you continue to take advantage of a system, you become evil, because I gave you an opportunity now you've rigged the game, you've profited, you became filthy rich off the backs of these innocent American citizens. You want to stop being evil, put your money into Bitcoin, stop stealing our wealth, and we'll let you slide. And if they continue to do it. So it's weird that it's like, I wanted to talk about that next time. And I also want to talk about the amount of, like you talked about the prison system in this. And is there a point where like a prison system could own enough Bitcoin to where the increased interest off of that Bitcoin every year could fund the facility? Does that make sense if I'm saying that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that stuff on the next one. I could just touch on it real quick right here. Like, I think I agree with you. If people keep manipulating that system, and I also look at it and I go, well, they don't know any better, right? Like that's the hustle they know, and they're going to stick with the hustle until it becomes obvious that they should have been hustling something else. The thing is Bitcoin's going to demonetize a lot of that shit. I mean, the only reason they make money off the stock market is a monetary premium. There is no, like if you go, hey, Nvidia is trading at a 60 PE, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Sometime in the near future, Nvidia is going to 60x their earnings. You go, no, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Just like, I own 14 houses that I don't need. And that makes sense because it doesn't. Like I was just talking to my mom, I'm like, if you had half a brain in your head, you'd sell your houses and go buy Bitcoin. She's like, I can't do that with my revenue and this. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like, X number of houses that other people can't buy. And that was one of the beautiful things Eric Stack said. He's like, yeah, well, I mean, 40% of the houses in America are rentals. It means there's 40% of the houses are owned by people that don't need the goddamn thing. And you go, well, gee, why is the housing prices so high? Because of the monetary premium, because people are trying to preserve their wealth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with stock market, same thing with art, sports teams, what franchises, like someone goes and buys Tesla, they go, I want to buy Tesla because I'm really interested in this startup. And you go, yeah, but are you, or are you just, I mean, I know there are people that are super Musk fans and whatnot, and maybe they just invest in that guy no matter what. I kind of look at it like, well, it's basically a meme stock as far as I'm concerned. I know people are going to shit all over my head for just even suggesting it, but I go, look, this guy is hustling this electric car market that nobody needs, nobody wants, and he's doing the same routine that the crypto companies do. He hypes this thing, he uses that for fundraising, and then he goes and takes that money and spends it on shit he really wants to do, which is go fly rockets to Mars. So you go, oh, it's good hustle. And when people go, how come he can't get behind Bitcoin? I'm like, well, 3/4 of his investors are green ESG, banana heads that don't understand that cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's kids making $2.50 an hour digging that shit out with their hands. They don't care about that because they like the green narrative, but they're the people that are buying all the Tesla stock. So if he goes and shits all over their head, then it's stock dumps. So you go, well, of course he's not going to say that, right?
Yep.
But yet, I mean, that's the thing is, why would you put a monetary premium in a company you don't give a shit about? Like, I want to buy Johnson and Johnson because I really believe in Band-Aids or something. You go, no, of course not.
Yep.
So if you have this pristine asset where you go, oh, I don't have to give a shit about their corporate earnings. I don't have to give a shit about the board makeup. I don't have to give a shit about a hostile takeover or getting gutted like GME did, or, you know, having some venture vulture firm come in and try and wreck it. I can just buy Bitcoin and just sit on it. But it changes everything, man. It teaches you like, hey, this is the way nature works. And nature works like, if I save up some seeds for next year, I'll survive the next winter. If I don't, I'm fucked. If I save up enough calories in my body, when the lean times come, I won't be fucked and you will be, because you were running around, you know, burn, you know. So it incentivizes savings and long-term thinking. And that's the order of nature. That's how we cooperatively get together. If you have one guy in your group that's going and eating all the food, you beat the shit out of him because everyone needs to save it, right?
Yeah.
Bitcoin lets you save. That's it. That's the only thing it incentivizes. To go, we need to save. And we don't need to bid up all this other shit because there's a money printer that's running constantly. In fact, the money printer kind of helps you in a way, because you get to keep, you know, like, I don't know what the world would have looked like without a money printer. Do you think we'd have Apple and Gap stores and Target? I don't know. I mean, like, who the hell would have ever built this shit if we had a sound money system from day one? A lot of that shit's going to evaporate, but I don't want it to evaporate like that. I want it to evaporate slowly, so people that like, you know, buying their throwaway clothes or whatever, they can keep doing that for a little while, and until they get used to living like Bitcoiners are living right now. We go, hey, we're kind of lean. We don't favor, like, I'm not running out and buying the latest toys and bullshit. I'm just saving up. Got a long time frame. I want to make babies. I want to live in a little house, you know. And it's nature, man. That's why it wins, and that's why Eric's right. We've already won. Just no one's realized it yet. So,
man, well, what a great way to wrap that up, Daniel. Man, I greatly appreciate you. Make sure you guys swing over there and follow this man. I got his Twitter up there. I got links to all of his stuff down there in the description. We greatly appreciate you, Daniel. Thanks for coming on the show, buddy, and look forward to having you back whenever you want to come back on, man.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, man. It was a great chat.
God bless you guys. Thank you guys for sticking with us. We greatly appreciate seeing you guys over here on the Ryan Matta Show. If you could do us a huge solid and smash that like button on the way out the show, it'll help us push this content out to the rest of the algorithm. God bless each and every one of you guys. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Run.